Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon webinar on Ukraine's European future. How do we move it forward? My name is Fredrik Eriksson, and I'm very pleased to be joined today by three speakers that I'm thrilled to have on our panel. I will present them soon, but I'll first want to take a minute to set the topic for today's conversation up. So, the war in Ukraine is still raging. Europe has done a lot to help Ukraine defend itself and take care of the consequences of the war. But it's obvious that we have not done enough and that there are many more things where European and Americans' assistance are needed, including, of course, military support. But we should also begin to think about the future. If it was not clear to everyone before, the war has reminded us that Ukraine is a part of Europe. It is also a country that for long have sought closer ties to Europe and Western bodies like NATO. Now, Ukraine have applied for membership in the European Union, and Georgia and Moldova have followed that example. While joining the EU is a process that will take some time, it is also a process that could be speeded up. There are steps that can be taken that are practical and that will accelerate market, trade, and economic integration for the application countries. There are also other developments on social, regulatory, security matters, for instance, that could happen sooner rather than later, and that could also help to anchor the European future of these countries, the vision of it, and at the same time give direct assistance to the rebuilding of Ukraine after Russia's demolition of cities, infrastructure, hospitals, factories, and more. So what could we do? And could we coordinate the processes for these three countries? These are some of the questions that I would like to ask for today's panel. I'm very pleased to welcome our three speakers, Alina Frolova, Tengiz Pakaladze, and Hanna Shelest. Alina is the deputy chairman of the Center for Defense Strategies in Ukraine and a former deputy minister of defense. She's the coordinator of the Working Group on Security for the Crimea Platform, a diplomatic initiative of President Volodymyr Zelensky. Tengiz is my colleague and senior fellow at ECIPE, where he works on Euro-Atlantic integration for the wider European region, and he also works on Russian foreign policy. He was previously an advisor to the president of Georgia. He's now also an associate professor at the Georgian Institute of Public Affairs. Lastly, but certainly not leastly, we have Hanna, who is the editor-in-chief of Ukraine Analytica and heads the security policy department at the Foreign Policy Council Ukrainian Prism. With a doctorate in international relations, she has lectured at many universities and worked with many NGOs outside Ukraine. All right, thank you all very much for joining. So I want us to start this conversation with Europe's efforts to assist Ukraine now. So we are going to discuss measures that are more for the medium and longer term, but it's inevitable that there are immediate needs and that without immediate support, the medium and the long term will look very different from what it could look like. Military and equipment support is an obvious area of discussion, but what else is there that is needed now? I know the list could be tremendously long, but Alina, if I start by asking you, beyond military support, what could Europe do more to help right now?
Well, hi everyone. Thank you for inviting. First of all, yes, it's really very important to keep the focus now on long-term perspective also. But you're absolutely right that we need to do some kind of short-term and very tactical actions which will influence the future of the Europe, also not only the future of Ukraine. And besides the military assistance, of course, the first issue is issue of sanctions, which are quite crucial and important. And we understand that the sanctions is quite like a long-term perspective. However, if the European leading countries will apply full blockage of the supply of Russian oil and gas, that could help a lot in really like influencing the economic power of Russia, which can support the military activities of them. So just for example, we have with Anna, our like a colleague who started to make the volunteer project, which is called Bloody Oil. And they are monitoring the supply of oil and gas to Europe and to other countries, and how Russia tried to avoid the sanctions and what it can bring. So only for last 2 weeks, starting from the March 14, they said that the supply of oil was down to 23 European countries, and that the total cost of the oil, total price of the oil which was delivered, equals to 770 Iskanders. So for you to understand that how much the thinking, consideration of each day is influencing the destiny of Ukraine, and not only Ukraine, but Europe itself. And this is the first issue, and the issue of financial sanctions, issue of the sanction in the Russian financial system without avoiding and giving possibility to avoid somehow this limitation. This is very important issue. Otherwise, we can rely only on long-term effects, which won't stop the war now. This is the first part of the story, let's say. So the second part is, of course, support with finance to support the Ukrainian budget and to support for now, yes, because actually we clearly understand that we lost ability now to use our ports and sea transportation to deliver the goods and services to other countries. And this is extremely crucial, especially in case of delivery grains and all the other products, which gives the substantial part of Ukrainian GDP. Another issue which is crucial now is, even in these circumstances, to assist to Ukraine with the restoring some infrastructure and giving possibility to restore at least some kind of economic activities, which can be especially agriculture. And this could be the second point of attention, because even with, for example, with grains, with the export of grains, we need to establish some kind of new routes for now. And this brings us to the position of Europe towards the Black and Azov Sea, which is extremely important, because this is even not about the occupying territory of Ukraine. This is the international waters, and we have the NATO members present there in the Black Sea. And nothing is done now to unblock the Black Sea, and we see already threatened from Russia about the mines, and we see yesterday attack at the a ship which do not belong to Ukraine. It has the some kind of other location, and it was heavily heated. So we see just attack of Russia not only at Ukraine, but all the international waters, which can be saved by international community, where some prototype at least of international law can be restored. And the last point I would say, this is really the assistance with refugees, because we really cannot. So Europe now faced one of the biggest crises of refugees, because for now we have 4 million of those who moved out abroad, and evaluation is that around 10 million overall became IDP or refugee. And in case if we do not stop this war together in quite short period, we can have more than 10 million refugees on European borders. And I think that European economies are not ready to bear such number of people who will arrive to Europe without having a job, without having some social guarantees. And we need to discuss it, and we need to understand how to support Ukraine with IDPs, and how to support refugees, and how to give them floor not only to be present in Europe, but also to now at least to establish some businesses, to participate in some businesses, to obtain jobs, because that's important for supporting also Ukraine. That's all well known, but I think that this is the full package which can be done and which we expect. And I hope that the latest events which were discovered here in Bucha, in Irpin. Today we have like a first route to Borodyanka, and I expect it would be some more evidences of war crimes. They give the full understanding of the nature of the Russian Federation and its policy, and give no space, leave no space for a long-term decision making about all these questions.
Indeed, thank you very much. We have indeed seen all the pictures coming out from Bucha and been terrified by it.
You know, I would like to add one issue, just like a very emotional stuff. And I have a lot of my colleagues in Mariupol who are like originated from Mariupol, and their parents mostly like were there all this period, had been there all this period. And when it was like a second week already or third week of this is not the occupation of Mariupol, but this is like a destruction, full destruction of the city. No gas, no food, no connection. They had only one place in the city where it was like a mobile connection, which was not safe, but they were jumping out from time to time there, like to say that they are safe. And the first question usually one dad of my colleague was asking when he like connected her, he was asking, did EU confirm that we will become a part of EU? This is important for people, and this is like, you know, they're suffering from no food, no water. They're suffering from missiles attack, but they are still asking the first question, what about EU routes? So that's for understanding of the passion of the people.
Indeed. So Hanna, if I turn to you, I saw a comment by the EU High Commissioner, or the EU what is it called, the foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, which has said yesterday that Europe has sent roughly 35 billion euros to Russia since the war started, and about 1 billion euro to Ukraine. I can't vouch for the exact quote or for the exact numbers in it, but I think it just goes to show the big discrepancy of being dependent on gas and oil from Russia, and how this continued dependency, the fact that we're still importing it, continues to fuel the financial capabilities of Russia to wage this war. So if I ask you basically the same question as I asked Alina, so in the shorter term perspective, what would be your advice to European policymakers that are thinking about making additional efforts to it? Stop doing a couple of things, I think, is one area which Alina pointed to, and stop importing oil, gas, coal, and other things that Russia exports and that we pay for. That would be one area. What else?
Thank you. Yes, there are quite a number of things that can be done or should be done. And I would say that there are certain things that should be done for Ukraine, and there are something that should be done for the European Union's sake as well, because there are certain things that we are seeing that are still neglected by some countries or some politicians, not understanding the risks and challenges for their own countries. And I would say I will start from those who are criticizing sanctions. Like, for example, we heard from a few German politicians recently that, but that is the problems with the German population. We are paying the high price. And maybe I'm very cynical after these 40 days, but I'm always answering, you're paying this price because you didn't want to pay anything for the last 80 years. And as soon as you tried to escape any strong statements or tried the appeasement policies that being perceived in Moscow as the weakness of the European Union, so definitely you are now paying the double price for all those 8 years, when maybe something can be done differently. We have this expression that history doesn't like the conditional sentences. What if? But at the same time, that is a reality. The Nord Stream 2 allowed Russia to see that they can use it as a mechanism against Germany. The very weak fight against Russian propaganda and media outlets like Sputnik and Russia Today in Europe paid now the price that you have population that I just saw a few minutes ago, the study of the Italian think tank about the perception of Italians about this war, only 60% think that Russia is guilty, that Mr. Putin is guilty. 60, you imagine, and that is already after everything, and we have just these numbers. So that is definitely demonstrating that there are plenty of things that have been neglected all these years that are now paid the price by Ukrainian lives and by the economy and the social being of the Europeans, because now you need to take care of refugees, you need to pay for the restoration, for the support of Ukrainian economy, and just to understand how to live in the new world. But what I would say, in addition to like completely agree with all Alina just been talking about, but several other issues except of energy, that is topic number one for sure. One of the big problems that we have now is the attempt to avoid sanctions. And that's what Russians are doing quite ineffectively, and what, let's be honest, some European companies are doing quite ineffectively. We just found the numbers about how much weapons the European Union member states sold from 2014 till 2020. That is billions of dollars, and such countries as France and Germany being involved, for example. And that is not some mechanisms for the, I don't know, oil industry. That is exactly what is within the weapons and ammunition categories. And then we have a lot of the opportunities of avoiding through the offshore companies. So as soon as you change the flag from the Russian flag to the Liberian flag, immediately these people are avoiding sanctions against the ships, against the airplanes, against all other issues. So it seems to me that now it is very important for the European Union not only to calculate what is the effect of the sanctions that they're applying, but also to look at all those loopholes, how the Russian Federation is trying to avoid, or what countries they're using to avoid. Because that's not only traditional offshore companies, but we see how India, for example, now is involved in this. And nobody's talking, everybody's talking about China, but nobody's talking about India, that used to have quite a good relations with many European countries. Nobody's speaking about the Arab Emirates, for example. Nobody's speaking about Armenia and some others. So that is definitely the issue that for the European Union, just for their own dignity, is important to double check and to see how to make the sanctions more effective. The second is definitely banking system. SWIFT that we've been discussing so long, and what we have something like 2% of banking system being just targeted by it. That's again, like it looks a little bit funny because okay, you targeted some banks directly dependent with the government, but you didn't target even the biggest Russian bank. And you still allow them to use other loopholes within the system, how to avoid, because Iranians already developed the system back in 2015, how to avoid the SWIFT blocking. What else is really touched me recently, that is a huge discussion started within a lot of European universities and think tanks, how to help so-called good Russians. When for the 8 years, 1 or 2 Russian academics were completely okay and even excused the Russian policies at different forums. Yeah, maybe they were not the open Putin supporters, saying that some of the policies are exaggerated, but at the same time, they were talking about that Crimea annexation was okay, that Russia has the natural interests, that's why they can behave like this against Georgia and Ukraine. And now suddenly these people would like to escape the country because the economic situation became difficult because they cannot participate in the international forums. So let's present the fellowships for these Russians. Honestly, it's not some hysteria from Ukraine or some Ukrainian nationalism, but all Ukrainian experts ask, how many of such fellowships you saw for Ukrainians, not only for those who escaped the country, like who are refugees now, but those who are staying, but without project, without work inside of the country. But at the same time, you would like to save the Russian experts who were completely okay with the Russian policies, who brought this Russian policy and even excuse it. And now they just can't be with Visa and MasterCard or with closed shops, and they would like to spend the time in somewhere in London, in Berlin, Frankfurt, or other cities. It seems to me that that is quite a serious issue that we also should not be ashamed to ask. Yes, I understand that there are some Russian experts, some Russian academicians who were open all these years about their positions, but that some differentiation may happen, and that's true. But at the same time, it's not only Putin. And this rhetoric that we hear now that, it's just Mr. Putin who is guilty, average Russians are not, definitely it's not Mr. Putin who is doing the things in Bucha. It is not Mr. Putin who is bringing all that Z letters to their kids in the small towns around the countries. It is not Putin who is signing the letter of 200 rectors of the Russian universities in support of the military campaign in Ukraine. So that's why it sounds really a little bit disgusting, it seems to me, when we suddenly started to see these attempts to excuse the Russians as the nations for what is happening. But if we speak about a little bit of the, yet one thing about the short term and then a few things about the long term, information security and information hygiene. The work with the media. We all support the freedom of speech and the independence of journalism. That's extremely important. That's those European values that all our countries support and respect. But at the same time, we've known, and there have been plenty of researchers within the last 8 years, how the Russian Federation been influencing media in many countries. Not only those countries like Hungary or Greece or Cyprus that have been under significant influence politically as well, but they've been buying a lot of media outlets in all countries around Europe. They've been creating the websites and everything. They've been just working with different journalists. And what we have now, that the question that I receive from many, for example, Italian media or German media, they're outrageous. They're completely out of the reality. They're speaking like the funniest question I received, why Mr. Zelensky would not punish Mr. Bandera for his nationalism just for the sake of peace. First, I was shocked. Then I needed to explain that Mr. Bandera was killed back in 1959 by the KGB people. So that means how people are really just bought the narrative of the Russian Federation about some crazy Ukrainian nationalists, and they are not even fact-checking about the reality. And it would be funny if it is one case, but when you receive 5 questions like these during the week, you understand that that is the pattern of what is happening in a lot of media outlets. But if we go to the social networks, or if we go to the websites that are not under the control, like some kind of anonymous websites, there are huge amounts of them in Germany, in Italy, in France, in many other, even in Denmark. We recently noted that they started to go to the Northern European countries as well. So that's something what is important not only for Ukraine, because such propaganda and information operations are diminishing the support European Union can provide, but that is important for the European Union itself, because these outlets are undermining the policies and decisions of the leaders of these countries to act respectively to the situation developing now. But few things that can be done for the future and what we need to start thinking already. First
Hanna, can we come to them in a second? And I'm actually going to turn to you in just a few minutes to talk about these more future type of issues. But I just want to bring in Tengiz in the conversation first, and to build on what you just said, Hanna, on sort of that history, not just from 2014 onwards, but I mean, this is a history which is longer than that. And you, Tengiz, have been working on an analysis for us, which basically starts with the collapse of the Soviet Union, and how ever since then there has been negligence by Europeans, Americans, and others about the independence efforts of countries that wanted to free themselves of the yoke of the Soviet Union and to create a different future for themselves. And that, of course, included Ukraine, Georgia, and many, many others. But sort of in that process, there has been this lingering view in Europe and in the rest of the West that, in a way, we have to kowtow to Moscow, and that we almost have to accept their view of the world, which is a view of victimization, self-victimization. And that view, of course, is fueling a lot of the Russian propaganda now. And as Hanna just said, I mean, there are lots of people in Europe who actually buy that propaganda, which is that If we're going to blame this war on someone, it's going to be either the Ukrainians themselves or it's going to be NATO, who has been trespassing on Russian interest for such a long time that it was inevitable that Russia was going to respond. I mean, we all know that this is just bogus, of course, but there are a lot of people who actually buy into it. And I wanted to ask you and sort of dive a little bit deeper into the history. I mean, the point here is not to go too deep into the history in the seminar. We're going to look towards the future, but I think it's an important point. And Tengiz, would you like to share that point with us?
Yeah, thank you very much, Frederick. Definitely, we have to learn lessons we should learn, because today we pay for our mistakes. Because this regime that threatened today is not just Ukraine but whole Europe. That's so brave and aggressive because of us, because of our mistakes, because we shouldn't pay enough attention to the very serious, alarming decisions done by Putin initially, be it when he first time start express his regrets about the dissolution of Soviet Union, when he invade Georgia, when he committed crime in Chechnya and was against free media and so on. Even 2014, despite the so many statements that was wake up call, the same I heard in 2008. There wasn't wake up call in 2008. Aggression toward Georgia was responded by reset policy and new business projects with Russia, and accepting Russia in WTO. And after the Crimea annexation, we saw Nord Stream 2 project and other projects and so on. Yes, there were sanctions, but not enough to stop Putin. And even more, we saw meddling, Russia's meddling in US election, in other European, I mean, EU and NATO member countries, and Russia didn't pay for that the proper price. So today we are a situation that we have to respond and make that really robust, and think about solution, because all our strategies, I mean, not, of course, not Georgian, but our European strategy was somehow to achieve ceasefire, and that's all. Not solution, because we had so many frozen conflicts in Europe. We had frozen conflicts in Moldova. We had frozen conflict, though I don't like this term, because there is no frozen conflict. There are unsolved conflicts. But the main strategy was somehow to freeze conflict, achieve ceasefire, and then start business as usual with Russia. So today, I don't think that Europe can afford another frozen conflict, because first of all, that's under interest of Europe, European prosperity, European future, because the main mistake we did is that we didn't pay attention to the nations who suffering a lot more than any others under Soviet Empire, and sacrificed a lot and contribute in the victory, because fallen of the Berlin Wall was our common victory. Regrettably, we didn't receive as much benefit as we expected, because even the aspiration of Ukraine, of Georgia, I mean, even declaration of independence, that was kind of, I wouldn't say that it was met by all our Western partners as we expected. And then Eastern Partnership countries, they even were in the situation to prove that they are Europeans. And of course, 2008, it was a huge mistake, because that was nothing but give green light to Putin to be aggressive, and by aggression stop integration of Georgia and Ukraine into the NATO. And till now, and as we are speaking about those security issues and so on, it's very frankly, it's still unclear to me when I heard that NATO is not ready to take on board Ukraine and Georgia, because I mean, first of all, there is no question anymore about interoperability, because what we see and war in Ukraine proved how professional is Ukrainian army. But the main question, when I hearing about alternative security guarantees, I have a question that if Germany or any other skeptic countries are ready to provide Ukraine guarantees, what Ukraine talks about, equal to the Article 5. So why is the problem to provide similar guarantees under NATO umbrella, which is much easier? I mean, if you are ready to engage in the conflict and consider aggression against Ukraine as an aggression towards Germany or any other guarantor country, why are you going to deal with that problem alone? Much better, and you are much stronger with NATO. So that's, I understand that's another discussion, but anyway, when I'm talking about the lessons learned and possible robust answer, that would be in two dimensions. The first, to make really clear that the West has red lines, and enough is enough, and red lines are red lines, and violation of international order that makes Russia accountable, and at the same time support Ukraine, support Georgia, support Moldova in their aspirations. Because if we just imagine that Putin somehow succeed in Ukraine, he will become even stronger, more aggressive. There is no doubt that after Ukraine, Georgia is the next, and Russia will take under his control not just Ukraine and Georgia or other countries. It will close all kind of alternative routes of transportation, energy resources, other goods, commodities, and then it will definitely challenge NATO and EU member countries, which is, by the way, Mr. Putin was pretty much outspoken about further ambition. So that's why I understand that price we pay today is high, but if we don't pay that now and don't pay properly, we'll pay higher, much higher price tomorrow. And in that regard, this is not only about NATO and US to offer security guarantees. EU also, I think, has to do more. First of all, I'm talking about the CSDP, and recently was another review of ongoing European security and defense, let's say, strategy. And European Parliament already recognized Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia as significant contributors in European security. And I think when EU thinks about its own security measures beyond NATO, Ukraine, first of all, as well as Georgia and Moldova, should be taken in consideration. And at least when we are talking about the threat assessment, we can't do proper threat assessment to the EU without Ukraine and without Eastern Partnership countries. If we are talking about security, I mean wider security, because that's not only military, those associated trio. It's not just a let's say, I don't like this word, but many skeptics consider that as a headache for the EU. No, it's not a headache. It provides opportunity. It provides opportunity because Ukraine is the biggest European country, and it has one of the most promising economic potential. If Ukraine receives proper support, and talking about the future, I think that now is the time to think and work about the Marshall Plan for Ukraine, and the real, not just rehabilitation, but plan as for full recovery and transformation of the country. And same about Georgia and Moldova. Yes, of course, there should be different approach toward those countries, because today you can't compare situation Ukraine is, or Georgia or Moldova are, because we have ongoing war in Ukraine. However, I think this, back to the EU problems and EU aspiration, this application should be like a game changer. And first of all, we shouldn't treat Ukraine or Georgia or Moldova as we did it before, when we had, normal situation, because today we have an extraordinary situation. And first of all, we should consider that sending proper messages to those countries, that's a political message towards countries who are sacrificing and people who are in the war. And at the same time, this is a very important message to Russia, and also against Russia propaganda, who always tries to prove that despite all kind of talks, visa liberalization, free trade agreements, and so on, EU is not going to take on board neither Ukraine nor Georgia or Moldova. And in that regard, questionnaire what EU should send to our countries, that will be kind of reality check where we are now, and the starting point for the EU integration, which has different dimensions. I understand that neither of us is ready for the membership, but granting, once again, Ukraine is a different case, but granting membership status to countries like Georgia or Moldova, although we are not perfect, that's additional tool for the EU to become more active stakeholder in the region, be it Ukraine, be it Georgia, be it Moldova, or wider Black Sea region, because that gives additional transformation leverage, and also empower democratic forces in those countries, and encourage us do more reforms, be more successful, and also establish much closer cooperation. By the way, Hannah just mentioned very important issue about Russian attempts to avoid sanctions and so on. I think in that regard, EU also should, EU is the right place of cooperation. Now, how we can avoid any miscalculations or any speculations about it. You know that that allegations also comes towards Georgia, and that's very important that we, as a aspirant countries aspiring EU and NATO aspirations, sharing common values and so on, be maximum cooperative in that regard, and use best practice to fight corruption, fight contraband, fight all the smuggling activities, and strengthen our state institutions and strengthen our nations and our security. This is also a contribution in our security and contribution in our European future. So to come to the conclusion, I mean, and back to the initial question, lessons learned should just prevent us from the mistakes we did before, and along with mistakes, EU has also success stories, and we have to adopt this success story in the current reality and be just brave and don't afraid to embrace European nations, because Ukraine is a European nation as well as Georgia and Moldova, and strength is in unity, and Europe will be much stronger.
Very good, Tengiz. Thank you. Let's move to Hannah right away and talk about where I think you stopped, Hannah, when you were talking before, because what I want us to talk about is basically, if we take that more longer or medium to long-term perspective on the application by Ukraine to join the EU. So, I mean, how would we build up a process that leads in that direction and that can soon start to yield some tangible results? Obviously, there will have to be support to help Ukraine rebuild its economy, to get kids back into school and get universities to be open again. Businesses would need customers and markets. Energy systems that have been damaged would need to be recovered. But can you sort of outline your preferences for sort of in what areas where we can start to make sort of the EU application, the EU process to become more tangible for Ukraine now?
Surely, a few practical things that came immediately to the mind, because you're right, the questions that we would need to address are tremendous, and we even can't imagine all those issues that we will need. But I would say like this. First of all, as soon as the European Union grants Ukraine the candidate status officially, that can facilitate many of these processes, because we know already existed mechanisms and instruments, financial instruments within the European Union policies that can facilitate with the financing, for example, with some bureaucratic procedures for providing assistance to Ukraine in many of the projects that we will be interested in. So the starting point should be at least the clear formulation of this candidate status and opening of negotiations, because that will allow them to speak about many instruments that already exist, not even starting the new process, because we know that unfortunately sometimes these long discussions about we have money but we don't know how to spend them, they're taking longer time than then we are implementing the projects. So that is point number one that can really facilitate on the ground. The second is probably the accent to the infrastructure, because Ukraine already, even before the war, needed assistance with the infrastructure development that would facilitate the connections around the country. Now, with everything happening, that is a good start to do it from the stretch, to do it not something for improvement, modernization, but to do it really as it should be, with the energy efficiency, with the safety, with the European norms and standards for these objects. So it seems to me that when we are speaking about this Marshall Plan, let's call it like this because that is understandable, the infrastructure should have a very good part of it to rebuild railways, to rebuild the bridges, to bring the energy efficiency, because that will help the country to unite and for people to return, because that also will be the work for these people to do, and the possibility for the certain reconciliation of the economy and of the social being. So that's why this thing is very important. Then I would say that it seems to me that we would need to revise the trans-border cooperation. We used to have so many grants and financial instruments from European Union about trans-border cooperation, but as a person that's been involved in many of these projects, including as the member of the decision-making body for granting them, I would say that they've been very, very inefficient, and a significant amount being spent for the administration of these projects rather than for the real trans-border cooperation. It seems to me that now that would be a good start to revise these trans-border cooperation projects in terms of priorities, in terms of mechanisms of financing and administration, because that would also help the small towns in the periphery to develop, first of all, what is really important. And that would assist the economy of the Western Ukraine, of the Northern Ukraine, because they are now seeing most of the people that needed to leave their country. And we understand that while we will be rebuilding Kharkiv, for example, for people physically being able to return, they would continue staying in Western Ukraine. And the projects of the trans-border cooperation would help both for them to be involved, because the economy of these regions needed assistance, but also because that will allow these not only humanitarian connection with the Polish, Slovakian, Romanian regions, but also the mental connection that being established now when we needed to deliver help or assist the refugees. So that would continue to this mental European integration of Ukraine as well. So we should not forget about this. And yet one issue that is coming to my mind, it is Ukraine to be included in the discussions about the European strategic autonomy. Because now the European Union in the process of discussing their new role in terms of security, not only as the economic or social union. And that is important that now to speak it together with the aspirant countries, together with the candidate countries, how we can jointly contribute and improve the strategic autonomy and security of the European Union. That will build the trust, and that will create the certain joint projects for the future. Ukraine already talked a lot that we would like to be involved in PESCO. And now it is a very good moment, also because the PESCO is finalizing the revision of the two previous waves, thinking about the new one. But also think from the very practical point of view, Ukraine and our enterprises, our armed forces already tried what is good, what is bad with the current warfare. We got not only physical experience, but also we tried a lot of things in terms of the ammunition, of the armory, of how the warfare is happening. And many of our military enterprises being targeted, and they would need some support. They have people with the knowledge, but they don't have the premises and assets. So that can be a good idea also for the joint development, to think about the joint projects for the PESCO, but involving Ukrainian capabilities, capacities, and brains in this. So we should not forget about these maybe very narrow targeting issues, but those issues that will also have the double effect. They can contribute to the European development and security, but at the same time really contribute for the future development of Ukraine in these spheres.
Indeed. No, I mean, I think that's a very good list to start with. Alina, you mentioned also a few areas when we began to talk about immediate things now, but it occurred to me that some of the issues that you were mentioning are also tremendously important over the long term in terms of trying to establish much more safer systems. So energy is one of them. I mean, as you mentioned yourself, I mean, there are, if you look at Mariupol or many other cities that have been ravaged by Russian missiles, basic infrastructure isn't working. So if you think about energy, can we do things to begin to basically integrate Ukraine into European energy structure? Another thing you mentioned was on open to what, or to the sea, openness to use international water in order to transport products. And that seems to me to be another obvious area where the EU should have a tremendously strong interest in establishing international law and make sure that it's being followed.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think Hannah, for a very good point about the industry, defense industry. Yes, because that's really true that we have like a tremendous intellectual assets here. Yes, and with all the distractions which we have, we will need very specifically target at defense industry, and that's a good point for cooperation, for joint enterprises, for some kind of European project here. And that's also probably, well, to start on strategic issue, I would like to say that we shouldn't think that any processes in Europe can be the same after this war. I mean, this is not only the war itself, this is destruction of the all existing international systems like the security systems, cooperation systems, and approaches to many, I would say, all systems in this like a big structure, which is called EU or international cooperation, should be changed. We see non-effectiveness of many mechanisms. We see non-effectiveness of UN Security Council and just all other like mechanisms. Here in Ukraine, we suffered so much from non-efficiency of Red Cross, for example, as an organization who we saw that it can influence. So this is like a multiple question, and we have practical now experience in how it can be applied and how it can be changed. Telling about the, so I would say that Ukraine needs to be hardly integrated in a labor market in Europe, because anyway, part of refugees will stay in Europe, and we all understand this. Yes, we know that many of them want to come back, but we also understand that some of them will stay. And to make this labor market open for Ukraine, like to give the floor for people go and back and exchange the experience, and to have like a real free flow of the labor, it's very important, not only to give the opportunity for Ukrainians to work in EU, but to give this like a basement for cooperation and for cross-border projects. And that's probably would be much better than only the specific project targeted at like a cross-border cooperation, because that's like it's about the more possibilities for everyone. About the energy, Ukraine started now to be integrated in the energy systems of Europe. You know that we switched to the electricity to the common system with the Europe already, that we now replacing the monitoring to European structures over the nuclear power stations. So this process started to be facilitated because of the circumstances. But obviously the question is that with such an approach of Russia to use the gas and oil as the part of the blackmailing of everyone, that Europe will need more stable supply of energy, and nuclear energy is part of this system, and Ukraine has a lot of capacities. And in Ukraine and in Europe, it should be some kind of protective mechanism, because we already understand that this like a security instability, it will last long. I mean, that even when we end up this war, we'll still face a lot of security challenges, and we need to have a mechanism which will protect nuclear stations and which will give the possibility to interconnect them. This is about the energy, and we also do not forget that we have like Romania, we have a quite big resources of gas in the Black Sea, which can be part of the joint projects. And before the war, by the way, I think that you know about the fact that before the occupation of Crimea, like a $7 billion, if I'm not mistaken, maybe Hannah will change it. So it was like investment projects which were already approved for the Black Sea, together with American companies, together with European companies, but all of them were canceled because of the occupation, because of the start of war against Ukraine in 2014. So I think that we need to change a lot of mechanisms of cooperation. And what I see that we need to have not only for Ukraine, but mainly for Europe, less bureaucratic systems, more frequent, more fluent reaction on the, and fluent mechanism of reaction on the different situation, and open labor market. I think this is one of the basic grounds for cooperation and for start of this cooperation. And I absolutely agree with Anna that possibilities for Europe, like for investment and for participation, are huge here, because we have like a multiple resources. We have this really ability to create many things from the scratch. With the highly advanced intellectual potential in Ukraine, I think it can be like a tremendous project with absolutely different approach to the point.
Indeed. And we're soon coming towards the end. I would like to continue this for another hour, but we are promised to end by 3 PM in Brussels time. But what I wanted to ask, and perhaps more specifically to Alina and to Hannah, so what would be your advice to many Europeans now that are willing to open up their homes in order to help refugees that are fleeing from Ukraine, help them to get a place on the labor market, thinking about sort of their planning for the future, sort of in a long-term interest of Ukraine. We would like them, of course, to gain experiences, gain knowledge, but also that they would be willing to return back home and rebuild the country at some point. So what can we do? Alina, Hannah, would you like to comment?
Well, as for refugees, I think that we all appreciate the support which Europe is giving now for refugees. I think that it's very important, and we understand that we can hardly start the normal educational process this year. Whatever happens, that would be quite difficult. And I think that it's quite important to give the possibility for our school kids and students to go now to European schools and universities, because it's our future. And this is, again, those people who will be responsible for restoration of the country too. And that gives the possibility to also rehabilitate them from the all the traumas which obviously they do have. And the more important, I would say, is for us, for all Ukrainians, it's to see that all the nations in Europe understand the situation and they're ready to restore the rule of law and the right and wrong positioning in here. That's very important, because we can suffer, we can fight, we lose our people, but we want to understand that we're fighting for normality. I mean, that we're fighting for world to be better. And if we will start to discuss the freezing the Russia presence here on new borders, or let's stop them not to escalate, or don't let them move just to nuclear, but let's agree on their conditions. That all will bring us back to the very unfair situation where the smaller political nation has no right. And this is extremely painful story, I think, not only for Ukraine, but for smaller nations in Europe. And that can destroy the Europe from inside. And that is very important, because I have a lot of questions from my friends from NATO countries who are not politicians. On the first weeks of this war, they started to ask me, do I still believe that NATO can protect NATO countries? Because this is like this is destruction of trust to the politicians in Europe, to the alliances of Europe. And I think that restoration of this clear point, what is right and what is fair, is very important for everyone.
I would
Indeed.
probably add a very brief thing. Just yesterday, we saw the research that demonstrated that 80% of Ukrainians who are currently refugees would like to return back to the country. That's probably the numbers you haven't seen in any other conflict for the last 30 years. Only 7% are not sure about their desire to return. And we can understand that these people may be from those territories like Mariupol that are completely occupied now, and people just don't understand where to return and in which conditions. And also that approximately 90%, we are speaking about women and children. That's also the picture that probably during the previous refugee crisis, none of the European countries saw. And that demonstrates, first of all, the real humanitarian situation and what is dangerous and how it would go, and the types of support that may be needed for these people, because especially with kids, that is much more complicated for the assimilation. Because I already heard plenty of stories that when people are arriving, the first thing they're searching some kind of job. So to do something, even with small kids. So that is not those people who are coming for the social benefits of Europe. Most of these people are coming because they were so afraid and panicking that they couldn't understand how to act, even if they were coming from not very dangerous places. But you need to understand that, unfortunately, now we can't say what is really safe place here. And if a week ago I've been explaining to everybody that in Odessa I'm completely safe, don't worry, then on Sunday morning I woke up from the 6 blasts and the fire that I could see from my window in the downtown. So am I safe or not? Definitely safer than Chernihiv, but I can't guarantee what will be this night. So I understand perfectly moms with the 3-year-old kids who are living even in these safe conditions because they're afraid that in case something is happening, they would not have this opportunity as it's happened in other places. So it seems to me that after 1 month, we had this first wave of refugees that have been just around the first aid that were needed. And now we need to think a little bit more structural about their needs, about the situation with them, and about the possibility of them to be integrated, but at the same time having the hope that they are returning back to the country as soon as they would like to do it.
Thank you very much indeed. And thank you also for those very good last points. And I think this is something to bear in mind for all those policymakers that are joining this event, and not just from Brussels, but from other national capitals as well, is when we're thinking about all the programs that we now want to establish in order to help refugees coming, also think about education, taking care of childhood traumas and indeed adult traumas as well, providing opportunities for higher education, and perhaps finding ways to involve many of the refugees that are coming in ideas and thinking about how to rebuild Ukraine in the future. Another point which I think is of tremendous importance, which you all have alluded to, is the collapse of international law and the consequences of that for not just smaller nations, but for the entire world. And this is also a point that was developed by Tengiz in the article that I was referring to initially, which is that when you look back at the history of the collapse of the USSR and what happened with many of the countries that aspired to independence after, there was negligence from European nations and from America, with everyone thinking that the most important thing, perhaps the only important thing, is to avoid that nukes are going to end up in the hands of people that we didn't know, and therefore they didn't take responsibility, for instance, for maintaining the integrity of the Budapest Agreement, or for thinking positively about the aspiration for independence of countries like Ukraine, Georgia, and others. And I think now it's a perfect example that we have passed that point, and that our embarrassment about this history should guide us to do the right things in the future in order to make sure international law is going to stand up, and that we protect the borders and the self-determination of our countries as best as we can. So with those sort of final departing comments and thoughts, I would like to thank all of you, Alina, Hanna, Tengiz. I have enjoyed this conversation a lot, and I hope I can have the pleasure of inviting you another time to continue this discussion, because there are a lot of things that can be done. There are a lot of things that Europe could do at this point, which is not just about providing military equipment, but to start to plan for the medium and long term as well. And that's going to be tremendous importance in creating a vision already now for where Ukraine is going to end up when all the atrocities that we're seeing right now has ended. So thank you so much, and thanks to all of you that have followed this event on different platforms. Hope to see you soon again. Good afternoon.
Thank you.